Welcome back to section 1. We just got word from our production manager, Mr. Holder, that we're going to go straight into the deposition with Dr. Ragoonath. We're going to talk about campaign financing. So, for time's sake, we're going to go straight into it. So,
Do we have Dr. Bishnu Ragoonath?
Yes, hello.
Hi, good day,
Doctor.
good day. 1 second, Doc. We're not hearing you properly. Let's just adjust the studio.
Okay.
Yeah, we could hear you now, Doctor.
Yes, good.
Right.
Good day. So we essentially discussing recently the amendments to the Representation of the People Act, where it seems as though the government is bringing in a version of campaign finance reform. And of course, we wanted to let our viewers know some of that. But before we get into maybe the details of the bill, generally, could you tell us, what is the use, what is the point of having campaign finance reform or campaign finance regulation in a political system? Is it useful? Should it be done?
Okay, so if you may allow me, go back in a little bit of history.
Yeah.
Since about 2004, 2005, there have been calls for campaign finance regulations in Trinidad and Tobago. It has been brought to Parliament on several occasions through private motions by independent senators in the main. But for all intents and purposes, there has been that need for campaign finance regulations. Why is there a need for campaign finance regulations? Well, campaign finance regulations hit at 2 points. One, to make sure that the political system is fair and equitable for all to participate. And secondly, it is also to protect the country from possible corruption and those sorts of things that come after an election, after a party has won. So for instance, a party could have a contributor contributing to the party's campaign. And because it is not regulated, that contributor could contribute as much as he or she wants. But with that person being an entrepreneur in a way, we call them political entrepreneurs, where they are simply putting aside money, they are putting money in the kitty, and when the party win the election, they are supposed to get a bulk of contracts and whatever else to get repaid for their contributions up front. So that's to stop the corruption. You want campaign finance regulations, but also because you want to increase the democracy and the fairness. Mm-hmm. And when we say democracy and fairness, in a case like Trinidad and Tobago, we have two major parties, the PNM and the UNC. One party may get, or these two parties may get the bulk of contributions, but then you have a lot of other smaller parties, smaller because they have not been able to mass the type of contributions and donations from other people. But they have a point and the position that they want to stand for. And we may want to ask, how can we increase the fairness, level the playing field so that these parties could participate effectively in an election? Because in the past, and in fact since 2008, in fact I think in 2008, we did estimates, and contesting an election as a political party ran into billions of dollars. In 2010, in the 2010 elections, I remember that we had estimated, when I say we, researchers like myself, as well as other organizations had researched, and we've gotten a bill of probably $1.2 billion was spent in 2010. We remember the 2013-2014 by-election in Chaguanas West, which Jack Warner ran as the ILP for the first time.
Yeah.
And literally that had run into nearly $400 million, that campaign alone for one by-election in one constituency. Now, think about it. If you don't have deep pockets, you can't contest an election fairly. And that is the context in which campaign financing is supposed to address some of those things. But it is also supposed to address the post-election issues, where we have to ask ourselves, why are people, or how have people contributed, and the impact upon their contribution in the post-election period.
But certainly, Dr. Ragoonath, you have to agree. Well, I mean, it is a view that first of all, part of your right to support a party or to have that type of political expression could be to give finance to parties, to contribute to the parties, and that sort of thing. So you are engaging someone's, I suppose, someone's right to contribute and to contribute to the political system. I mean, not everyone could be a politician. Not everyone may have views, but they may support a political party. So that you may, campaign finance, I think you would agree, it is not about, and there's a perception that it's about totally stamping out private financing, but it's really not about that, is it? It's more about regulating and having a sense of transparency in the process. So we should know who is giving money, so that if we see later down the line that person is getting all the contracts, there are political consequences and I suppose legislative consequences to that as well.
Yeah.
Definitely not. This is not about regulating or managing who gives what to whatever political party, you know.
Yeah.
This is about just making sure that there's some degree of transparency.
Right.
If I may use two examples, probably one before your time. When Max Henhouse was alive, Max Henhouse would have given, I mean, he was known as a PNM supporter, but and this was talking about ULF PNM elections, 1976 thereabouts, and Max Henhouse would have told the PNM the ULF supporters in those days, or the ULF party, well, here now, I have a gas station down in St. Augustine there. I'm not giving all no cash donation, but all come and fill up your tank for all the mics that going around every day.
Yeah.
Now, basically what Max Henhouse was doing was simply saying, I given to the PNM, you know, but I also given to the ULF.
Yeah.
Fast track that to 2005 thereabouts, or 2000, when we had the UNC and the PNM. And what did CLICO do at that point in time? Well, of course, they had Montai in the PNM as treasurer of the PNM, and they had Carlos John in the UNC. And whoever won the election, well, the company supported both sides.
It's an investment, a portfolio investment.
It's an investment. That's why we call them political entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
In that context, but did people know about that?
Yes.
Did people know, I mean, did they publicly and transparently say we supporting both sides? And the simple answer is no.
Yeah.
So basically, we're not saying that you can't do that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And campaign finance is not about saying don't or stop that. That's not what campaign finance regulation is about. It's about ensuring that we have transparency. We may recall that immediately after the UNC won the election in 2010, there was the allegation that Kamala Prasad stayed at somebody's house in Tunapuna.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of her staying at his house, his company got several contracts.
That was the allegation.
Yeah.
Well, and like I said, there was an allegation. I'm not saying true or false. I don't know.
Agreed, yeah.
But the allegation was made.
Yeah.
And the point about it is simply what we're saying with campaign finance regulation. Why we needed this is simply to say we need to make sure that there's transparency. And we don't want people to make allegations of corruption all the time when we have an election and say you're only getting this because you had contributed and this, that, and the other.
Now certainly some of the sections that have been introduced now in the bill that we are about to discuss lends to that transparency. You would agree with me with that. Specifically, as you were discussing, political entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Political entrepreneurs. What we had is one of the sections, or one of the proposed sections in the bill, is that anyone who has a government contract for the past 2 years, once you are making a donation or you're making a contribution to any political party, registered political party, that contribution must be sent into the commission no later than 14 days. Now, talking about the bill itself, what are your thoughts in the proposed bill? Does it achieve the level of transparency that you would want?
Well, it's a starting point. And I want to start there. It's a starting point. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, this government, we have had serious concerns about whether or not the government wants transparency and accountability. I will tell you, for instance, where did this start with the PNM in power in this last term? And in 2016, the government held a major conference at the Hyatt to talk about campaign finance in over 3 days. I participated in that. And then later that same year, for instance, the Prime Minister went to London and said that give a presentation in an anti-corruption convention saying that we are going to bring campaign finance legislation into Trinidad. Mind you, when was this bill dropped in Parliament in the first place? It was dropped just a matter of 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the Parliament prorogued and was solved. And in that context, there was absolutely no way it could have gone anywhere when we understand the timing of the bill. Of course, they have reintroduced it on the 4th of October, I think it was. So yes, it is a point of departure. There's a lot of room for it to go further. More importantly, there are various things, for instance, that needs cleaning up in this bill before we go forward. And for instance, a simple thing. Who is going to be in charge of this whole thing of campaign finance regulation? Is it the Elections and Boundaries Commission, or is it going to be a regulator within the Elections and Boundaries Commission? And in that context, who is really in charge? Because, for instance, in one part of the bill, it tells us about the regulator, and in another part, it tells us that the commission. So we ask ourselves the question, who is in charge? And who is actually going to be making these kinds of decisions?
Hopefully.
Other kinds of things that tells us, for instance, about the distribution of state funds and so forth for campaigns, and or at least the funding should come into the consolidated fund and then passed on. But the question is there, when we talk about equality and so forth, what does equality mean? Now, I have been into the election period monitoring aspect for years. And I could tell you, for instance, and you just made a statement there, for instance, about you must make your declaration 2 weeks in advance and so on. But in politics is a very dynamic thing. Politics, a party could start within a matter of 2 weeks before an election and probably go out there and make serious inroads in a campaign.
So I agree.
You saw that with the ILP.
Correct.
So the question here is, timing is all that's important, and while all of that is important, like I said, this is a good point of departure for us. It's a good jumping off point. It's not a perfect bill, but it tells us some of the things that we need to talk about and we need to look forward and go forward with as we move into the future.
One of the things I wouldn't say I'm concerned with. I mean, I'm not into politics as yet at any rate. But one of the things I looked at, probably as a lawyer and probably as someone who wants to ensure fairness, you have a government that is installed, that is in power. It has control of the budget. It has control of the financial resources of the company. In our unique situation in Trinidad, it has control of a state media house, media apparatus, that sort of thing. Any party opposing the government would obviously, to some extent, rely more on private financing, on financing by financiers, by supporters, as opposed to a government who usually has most of the face time in the media. I mean, we saw in the lead up to this election, you had a health media conference almost every day because of coronavirus. Whether or not that was needed, well, the experts would say. But at the end of the day, the government can use resources in government to expose their ideas, their views, and their, let's say, propaganda for now, to the population. Whereas you have an opposition who may not have, well, would not have access to that, but certainly would be relying more on private finance and that type of dark money to get their message and get their advertising out. Is there a place, is there an argument to say, well, this type of regulation sort of creates an imbalance between both both sides, especially in a two-party political system as we have in Trinidad? And does the bill achieve? Because I saw that there were some provisions about equal time on media houses and that sort of thing. But I don't think that on its own does it. Is there an argument to be made? But look, you have to carefully draft this thing to ensure that there's equity amongst the parties and amongst contenders for political power.
Well, you see, again, like I say, you all are young in the business.
Yeah.
In the 70s and 80s, when we had one television station,
right,
when we had two radio stations, two AM band radio stations operating in Trinidad, what happened, even though one of them was state-owned, one of them was private, the point about it, what happened in that context is that the government at that point in time ensured that there was at least some time given to the other political parties to have their views expressed on state-owned television.
But that was a matter of convention.
Right. But from the time we went into private television stations and we expanded the network and so forth, all of that went through the window. Now, the reason I mentioned this, and again, you see, when I said that we have taken a point of departure with this bill as a good start point, but it's not the end. We could look at the rest of the Caribbean. And I've gone through the legislation in the rest of the Caribbean, for instance, on elections and managing elections and so forth. And I could tell you that in several other countries, that is stated clearly in their election law as to how much time other parties should get on state-owned media and so forth. Whereas in Trinidad, we simply did away with it. And that is the context in which, when you raise the point as to whether or not we need to talk about and to put in legislation certain aspects of how we're going to manage and facilitate equity. We're not saying equality at this point in time.
No.
Saying equity in the participation for and the campaign process. We need to put those things in legislation.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that, in fact, I hope that within the next month or so, that I could probably meet with the Elections and Boundaries Commission to hear their own perspective on this. And I'll tell you why I say that. Because in 2015, when the Council for Responsible Political Behavior was launched, and we had the Code of Ethical Political Conduct signed off by the political parties, the then chairman of the Elections and Boundaries Commission had said, look, several of the things that we have in the Code of Ethical Political Conduct should be in the EBC's laws and legislation.
Yeah.
And in fact, he had suggested that those were the things that should be put in there. But of course, that then chairman has since, retired and passed, unfortunately. And the new chairman, I am not sure whether they are, or the new commission of the Elections and Boundaries Commission, have made any significant contribution into what has found itself in now as the bill in the Representation of the People Act, the amendment bill. So we really need to hear from the EBC too, what are their positions and to the extent to which they would be able to manage such a process, or whether somebody else has to do it.
Yeah, understand.
Yeah, no, I think we're good.
Doc, one thing, we didn't want to let you get away without, and given your expertise, without maybe a comment on what has taken place in the United States of America in relation to that process and what is happening there. You have any comments on what is happening there in terms of the protests reaching into the Capitol and whether or not democracy and the electoral system there could now continue to withstand scrutiny and function as it should?
Well, the one comment, or the two comments I'll make to that, is that what this action showed us is that America is no better than the rest of the world. That they are also subject to the kind of intrusions and invasions and the anarchists and everything else. But the one thing that we have to take away from what has happened in America is that notwithstanding what happened during the day, by 8 p.m. that same night,
they were back in order.
They were able to reconvene in both houses of Congress and were able to carry out the business of
Yeah.
the country.
Yeah.
Now, I remember, I mean, I sat glued to my television on that day, and I looked at scenes, and I remember similar scenes of our own parliament
Yeah.
in 1990.
Yeah.
And in fact, I had on a WhatsApp group, I had asked whether, do you all recall seeing this in Trinidad in 1990? And then, of course, I had to say, well, it's for the older people, not for the younger ones. But the point about it is simply one, that the mere fact that they could have gone back out there, sat and completed their legislative business the same day, at least started it back on the same day, is a lesson for the world to learn.
Yeah, their democracy was strong enough to withstand that type of upheaval.
Yeah.
Right? And that, I think, is the main takeaway from that. Of course, there's the other side. I mean, clearly, the whole issue about race is still there. I mean, Black Lives Matter, we've seen the difference in how they treated the blacks as opposed to the whites, and all of these things. Those are critical issues also. But the main takeaway is that their democracy withstood an attack and was able to reconvene within less than 12 hours.
12 hours, yeah, correct.
That, I think, is most important.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for your insight, Doc. We hope to have you on.
Yeah,
well, maybe after you finish meeting with the EBC, we could bring you back on to share some of those insights.
Our show is about developing, our sovereign democratic state and starting a discourse on politics and this type of conversation as opposed to the hard-nosed politics. So we'd definitely like to have you back on at some point in time to discuss issues.
It has always been my pleasure to contribute however I can.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doc.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And I mean, you could tell how knowledgeable Doctor is.
But I really like his take, and I suppose I had it in mind about the American situation, but he put it very well. He said, because you got a lot of things on Facebook, etc., where people were saying that we're no better than Venezuela, that USA is no better than Venezuela, no better than third world countries, banana republics. And he said, yes, those things happen there, but you understand the distinction.
Yeah.
America's democracy was strong enough to withstand that and get back to business within a matter of hours.
Their democracy and their politicians.
And their politicians were enough gumption,
Yeah, and that's the point. The senators that were there, I mean, some of them were tweeting. A lot of it put out very serious releases, but all of them echoed the same thing on both sides of the divide.
Both sides of the divide.
As soon we're going to have this under control, and we're going to continue with the business of the people. And that was admirable. I mean, as Doctor put it is very clear that their democracy was strong.
It was strong enough, flexible enough to accommodate violent, even very virulent and violent protests. And it has recovered quickly enough. And they were able to get along doing their regular democratic process. There was no coup. There was certainly no successful coup. Some people are using the term coup loosely, but there was no successful overtake of the government.
Some put it, as you put it very earlier, it seemed to be some sort of, it wasn't a coup per se, but some sort of insurrection. I mean, storming the Capitol building, it could only lead to that in front. And then you had, and as you said, it was strong enough to bend, but it didn't break. And they came back and they do the people's work, and that's what they're there for. Leading to the discussion with the campaign financing bill. And I agree with Dr. Ragoonath. This is a very good starting point for us.
It's a launching pad.
It's a launching pad, and it's very important because now you're seeing I was mentioning to Kyle earlier today. It's a long bill. For those of you who want to try or attempt to go through it, it's about a 75-page bill. But you could see that the drafters of the bill would have put certain things in place so that they can ensure transparency in the system. And
you see, it's important that we understand that, and like the Procurement Act, like other bills that are coming, nothing happens, no significant change happens overnight. You have to have inroads. And at least, you're going to have a platform for campaign finance regulation. You're going to have a platform for procurement. They work together. Believe it or not, they work together. Whether that's by design or chance, we will see. But they work together. And you have to at least take half a loaf. Half a loaf of bread is better than none. So we have to take the campaign finance reform as it is. Yes, there are things. I raise the issue because one of the things that concern me about the bill is that you have a government that has access to all the resources of the state, but you're limiting the amount of money. Well, you're not limiting, But in effect, you're going to limit, because no businessman contributing thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars to a political party wants their name registered in a in a public way for people to see. Nobody wants that.
Well, there are provisions within the Act that legislates for anonymous donations.
Yeah.
But it's even more stringent on the political party.
Correct. Yeah.
And as you say, I mean, let's not beat around the bush. We have a two-party system in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
And a lot of these provisions really and truly kind of strangles the smaller political parties.
I think it will naturally favor a party that is
well established,
that is in government.
Yeah.
It's going to favor you, and let's be real, the days of volunteerism in political campaigns are no longer. It's almost gone. At the end of, I mean, I have been involved in several political campaigns. Everybody wants money. Everybody wants, you're going to have to pay somebody to count the votes. You have to pay somebody to supervise the votes, the polling clerks, your polling agents. You have to pay your people who are the mock stations. You have to pay, and there's nothing wrong in that, because ultimately you're asking people to give up an entire day's work to work for your party, to contribute to democracy, to contribute to ensure transparency and accountability. We don't know what could take place if one party had no representative in the voting booth. I mean, that's not a cast aspersions on the EBC, but ensuring that each party has a representative while votes are being counted. It's a costly affair, but it adds to the transparency of the entire process.
Of course.
Right? When you have criticisms, equally you could have counter arguments to the fact, well, you had a representative in there, so you should be satisfied.
Yeah, right? And that's where, and as I'll echo the sentiments again, this is a launching pad. I think this is a very good start. It's a good departure, as a good knowledgeable doctor puts it. It's a good starting point. It's a good departure from what we have, and entering into something now of campaign financing, so that we know, look, if it is that this, quote unquote, as the doctor put it, political entrepreneur gives money to a certain political party, and then we realize that this person is getting a whole set of government contracts for whoever, we will know. I mean, the party, whoever that party is, will face the political consequences from both the opposition and the members of the public.
That's it, but I don't think the bill goes as far as prohibiting.
No.
But at least there's transparency.
At least there's transparency, and that's the point. And that's something that we don't have right now.
And we know that the American system, you have the system of super PACs.
Yes.
And how much you could contribute, and you're entitled to a certain amount of contributions from certain donors. So we understand that the Americans have evolved a system.
I mean, the limit is very high.
Well, you're talking about billions in 52 states.
Exactly.
100,
so it's hundreds of millions of dollars. But even the Canadian system is one that is it's a very transparent system. Doing some of the reading and stuff like that previously in campaign financing, you realize how strong the Canadian system is. I mean, they have led the world in many aspects in legislation, but their campaign financing is very strict, and it's very transparent, and that's something that we could aspire to. And again,
now, this is a bill, and just to inform the viewers, this is a bill that is before Parliament, but I think it's still before the Joint Select Committee.
It's still before the Joint Select Committee.
It is coming up, and one of the reasons that Stefan and I decided that we wanted to bring this to your attention is because we think that is important. The deadline for making submissions to the Parliament has been extended to March, from my understanding.
Yeah, I believe so.
And I think each citizen, we all complain about corruption, we all complain about the political system is broken, we all complain that finances, the 1%, the this, the that. Well, now is your chance. You have 2 months. Take a look at the bill. Stefan and I think what we will do is probably do a document where we summarize some of the main areas of the bill and put it on our website, put it on our Facebook. Have a read of it. Make comments, because
and
submit it. Let the AG, let the government, let people know what your views are. We can't change. Now, they may ignore you, I'm not going to be so optimistic to say that we are going to influence the outcome of the bill, but at least they will be on the record.
Correct.
Hundreds of comments coming from our citizens saying this is what we want, this is what we don't want. In a critical piece of legislation.
And that's the point. Whichever side of the political divide you stand on, this is a very integral, it's a very important piece of legislation that's going to affect us for years. And you remember, an election appoints the party and the administration for 5 years. And we have to ensure that not only is there free and fair elections, but you have to ensure that there is no corruption within and this is a good starting point towards it. So as Kyle said, We will endeavor to put a summary on our Facebook page, but I want you guys to go ahead and make those comments, submit it to Parliament, because that could only lend to our democratic process.
Nothing is going to change in this country unless people make the change.
That's the point.
Change doesn't come from the top.
No.
Change comes from below.
Yeah.
And we need, as a people, as a citizen, as a group of citizens, to come forward, let our ideas be heard, and make representation. Here you have a perfect format of a joint select committee. If you have your groups, if you have your little village groups, your little
neighborhood
clubs, whatever it is, because this affects every aspect of life, because it's politics and how we finance our politics. So go forward, get your comments together, get your thoughts together, and put forward suggestions for a joint select committee to look at. And it helps because when the debate is eventually had in Parliament, politicians, it could be from the opposition, the government, would be able to cite some of those comments that came forward and justify their positions. And what you have is a better bill, a bill that is more democratically acceptable, and a bill that we all contribute to do. So it's everybody's duty to look at it, try as best as you could. If you need help, we will try to do some stuff on our Facebook site. But make the contribution, make the comments, participate in your process. We need to change the culture of Trinidad and Tobago of just sitting back and waiting for change to happen.
And taking it. And then
complaining.
And then complaining. That's the point. We sit down, we take it, and then we say, well, look, the 1% this and the 1% that, or the corruption is there, and then we need to move.
And this gives us a perfect opportunity, a model of participation.
Yes.
Participate. Don't not participate and complain. Participate. Make your comments and let's see what happens.
Yeah, correct. So before we go on to a break,